Resume recording. All right. So today's class is essentially to go over how to elicit requirements. And so when I say elicit, let me share my screen. It really to how do we gather requirements, right? So far we went through the how to kick off a project, how to determine use cases, use case narratives, and then the other parts of it were really how does data fit in all this? So in this instance, this is kind of the key piece of business analysis as well, because one is it helps you build your skills in getting information from people that may not really know what they want. So that's in itself a skill set. So as part of this session, we're really going to go over how do you identify what techniques to use in order to elicit, aka gather requirements from your customers. Because really it's making sure that you use the right technique, and I'll go over that with you. How to prepare for those techniques, right? So say for instance, if you're interviewing someone or a stakeholder, how do you prepare for those sessions? And then the last one is you're actually in those sessions. How do you conduct? How do you confirm? And how do you communicate following those sessions? Before I move forward, and just in general, this is kind of, I thought it would be interesting to share this because really, pull this up a little bit full screen. So really, as an analyst, so if you look at this, you're kind of the business analyst, and you're saying, as an analyst, I need to know, what do you want? The stakeholder is saying, well, I want you to design the software for me. So the business analyst says, but what do you want to do with the software? And so the stakeholder is saying, I don't know until you tell me what the software can do. So then back to the BA saying, well, I can design software to do anything. Stakeholder says, can you design the software to tell you my requirements? So the reason why I'm bringing this up, because there's so much truth in this. You know, as stakeholders, sometimes they really don't know what they want, right? And then what they kind of ask you as a business analyst is, well, how does the system work? And so you're kind of stuck in between development and the stakeholder, and you're there to understand, well, what are the requirements? Let's get into the how a little bit later, but let's understand what your needs are. So just keep that at the back of your mind whenever you're meeting with your stakeholders. I can guarantee you there'll always be a conversation around how. You want to entertain those conversations, but at the same time, you really, as a business analyst, your role is to understand the what. So keep that at the back of your mind, and as you move forward, you'll understand.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my phone somehow just dropped, so let me go back. Hey, Amarpreet. Okay. So back to this conversation here, it's really making sure that you as a BA understand that you're out there in these sessions to understand the what, not so much the how. Because without knowing what the requirements are from a stakeholder, it can get there can be a lot of
Hi
swirling.
guys. Hi, sorry, my headphone is just messed up today.
Yeah, no worries. I'm having issues as well. So if you can't hear me, just put it in the chat or just say something. All right, so we're just going through eliciting requirements, and that's kind of the session for today. So this gets into the definition of what is elicitation and collaboration. And really, this is kind of the Babok version of definition. I just don't want to get line by line. Really, eliciting requirements is to say, hey, it's basically meeting with your customers and stakeholders, understanding what their needs are, their requirements are, and that's the key piece of making sure that you get the requirements pat down correctly. So the first part of it is identifying the method of elicitation. So really, we went through all these things of kicking off the effort, data, use cases, so on and so forth. But this is the meat of things, right? So this is where you sit down and you meet with your customers. But before you meet with your customers, really there's so many different techniques, like the BABOK or even PMI, PBA. If you go through that documentation, there's a whole bunch of techniques that you can use in order to do business analysis. But what I've identified here are really the key pieces that are needed for elicitation, meaning the key methods. So as an example, before you go in and elicit requirements, you need to understand, well, should I do one-on-one interviews? So this is kind of the most common technique for gathering requirements, where you really sit down in front of your stakeholders and you have one-on-one interviews. Now, that may not be the best technique. Then you say, okay, well, am I going to interview a group of stakeholders, right? So that's where you have group interviews, similar to one-on-one interviews. But in this case, there's a group. And I can tell you, when you do group interviews, just be very organized, be very succinct in what your objectives are for that group interview session. Another session is facilitated sessions. You bring a larger group together for meeting a common objective. So in this case, you're trying to understand, well, what are the common set of requirements that are needed from this specific group? And what this does is it helps in gathering requirements in a much quicker fashion. So based on where you are in your project and maybe even timelines, you would kind of pick and choose from these techniques. JAD sessions. Now you may hear in a lot of interviews, you'll hear like, what is a JAD session? What is a JAR session? Really, JAR sessions are sessions where you have your developers, testers, stakeholders all in one meeting. And really you're documenting and understanding requirements. These sessions are tough because you don't necessarily have the undivided attention from your stakeholder. And what makes it tough is conversations get into a how as well. So there's that skill set needed in these sessions in order to bring it back to the what, and you'll gain that over experience. Doesn't happen overnight. Next is questionnaires. Questionnaires are really questions that can be sent ahead of the session, really. So it's like a survey. People use that ahead of sessions, like could be one-on-one interviews, could be group sessions. So you could use these techniques in combination, but questionnaires are typically questions that are sent ahead of time, or sent ahead, but used as part of your interview session. Prototyping. So prototyping is interesting, right? Because it's used a lot in Agile, and I'll go through methodologies in the following sessions. But prototyping is really you build a model of your solution. So as an example, in our case study where we said the requirement is to have an online ordering system. Well, prototyping could be where you have your developers build a piece of that online ordering system. It could very well be maybe displaying the menu screen, and you share that with your customer. And then the next prototype you could do is payment. So it kind of goes iteratively with your customer, and you get feedback from your customer, meaning in these instances, you're doing rapid feedback loops, and you're also gathering your requirements at the same time. Observation. These sessions are interesting because it gives you an insight as to what a person is doing on a day-to-day basis. So these are interesting because you can use observations in instances where it's a specific business process flow that you're hoping to automate, right? As an example, for our case study, because it's a new platform, observations may not necessarily, actually, it won't be the technique I would use. I would probably use, say, one-on-one interviews, group interviews, facilitated sessions, maybe even chat sessions, and prototyping. So, as I said, you could use a combination of any one of these to have your sessions. The next piece of it is now you've identified the method of gathering the requirements. Now, the key thing is to keep preparing. I can't emphasize how much it becomes important to kind of prepare. In many instances, you may not have the time, right? And that's where you negotiate with your project manager or whoever's running that project to say, hey, look, are you looking for quality, or are you looking for a requirements that are half-baked? So you can use kind of these terminologies to make them understand that if I don't prepare, the quality will suffer. So that's why I kind of recommend preparing as much as you can, not extending timelines, but making sure you have what you need as a BA to do your job. Couple of steps here to follow is, one is determine how many systems are involved. So by knowing how many systems are involved, it helps you identify stakeholders that you need to gather the information from in order to understand things like, what are your interfaces? What is the data? What are the processes? What are the business rules? So in this case, going back to the case study, you may have, in this case, we may have one system involved where there's an existing website, right? So that there's one system involved. But this is like a smaller case study. But in bigger enterprises, you'll see that the systems get humongous. It gets like a big cobweb. So that's where it helps to understand. And even for number one, meet with your architect, right? So when we say architects, they're folks that are engaged or that are responsible for making sure that systems are built based on specific enterprise or company standards, or industry standards rather. So number one is you're done with that, then you move to number two. We already did this, right? So we identified our stakeholders for our case study. We did that earlier on. So you should have like a roster of who your stakeholders are, and then you should probably take this into the next step is, will having all stakeholders in one meeting make sense? I mean, does it not make sense? So that's number two, is kind of critical for you to understand, well, what technique should I use and how should I organize these sessions rather? Number three is understand the importance of personalities of your stakeholder, right? So ultimately, you're only as good as the information you're getting from your stakeholder. So from a stakeholder from a personality perspective, one may be an introvert, one may be an extrovert, one may be dominating the whole conversation, but they may not have that much of an importance in the project. So think about those factors as well, because as an example, if you're in a meeting with all stakeholders in one room, and you have one stakeholder that keeps speaking up, and you realize that this stakeholder is not all that important in terms of requirements, and your key stakeholder is quiet, you kind of need to nudge the other key stakeholder, maybe take the stakeholder on the side that's not speaking to understand what's going on. Think about that. So these are all soft skills. The other piece of it is what's the learning style, right? Some people are visual, some people are not visual, they're very textual based. Some people just like to have conversations. So what works for people? I found that majority of the folks do very well with visuals. So if you can present like a visual and use that as your reference point in these meetings and keep going back to that, it helps kind of keep people in check. Number 4, based on how much time you have to get your requirements completed, select the method of elicitation. We went through that earlier. And in that case, you would have already prepared. You would have identified, well, what type of a method should I use? What is the scope of the project? That's number 5. We already went through scoping. Scoping is important because as a BA, you need to understand, well, what is the scope of this project? I can tell you when you go into these sessions with the stakeholders, they're going to throw things at you. It's almost like you're this one, I don't know, soldier, and people are throwing darts at you, right? So you have to kind of sift through those darts and understand, hey, what is the actual scope of this project, and keep bringing them back to this conversation. So why I'm bringing this up is because going into these sessions, it's important to understand the scope and keep revisiting the scope with your customer as well. Make sure that they understand that this is what we're dealing with, and understand, well, does this fit within the scope? 6 is build a questionnaire for your stakeholders. So before going into the meetings, there's 5 keywords that you want to keep in mind when you're building a questionnaire, right? So you want to put your questions down that you're hoping to ask your customer. The way to do that is to really look at it from the perspective of the 5 key question words: the what, the who, the why, the when, and the how. So those are the 5 things, and I can show you how to build those questions as well in a little bit. Number 7, understand your stakeholders' schedules and find the time that works.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Can you please just one more time repeat the 5? I got the who, when, why, what. What else are we, you know?
Yeah. So it's why, what, when, where, and how.
Got it.
Yep. And I have a couple of samples for you.
Okay.
For you guys. So then try to figure out the stakeholder schedules, because many times as a BA, you're at the discretion of your stakeholders. Reach out to them ahead of time. Sometimes your project managers will have those schedules depending upon what the communication style looks like with your stakeholders, but making sure that they're available is important. If there are multiple stakeholders that need to be engaged, you could send out a survey ahead of time saying, these are the time slots that I'm looking at. What works for you? And let them hash it out in terms of their schedules. The other part of it is, given that there's a lot of teams that are distributed, meaning offshore, there's some in Europe, Canada, India, make sure that there's schedules are aligned. And even if your developers are, say, in India and can't make the meetings, make sure that you record those meetings and loop back with your offshore to make sure they've listened to those recordings and see if they have any questions. And then also important for you as a business analyst to make sure that in the meeting invite, you put in the goal of your session. Okay, so stakeholders love to use sessions where they're all available, so sometimes go off track. So that's where you can kind of use the goal that you've already outlined in the invite to make sure that they know exactly what this meeting's all about and kind of bring them back. So I'm going to pause here, see if you have any questions.
I'm good.
Okay. So I have all the stuff listed on my website. So really it gets into the details that you need. Step 3, now shifting to the website. You're now conducting these elicitation sessions. Now you've already prepped, you've already sent your meeting invites, you know your technique that you're going to use. Now you're in these sessions. So now it's showtime, right? So now you're in these sessions and the meeting day arrives and you're facilitating and leading the meeting using the agenda that you've sent out. So what's key here is there's a couple of things before you start out the meeting, and it depends upon how long your meeting is. I would recommend, if stakeholders don't know each other, introduce themselves, put in an icebreaker saying, what's your favorite movie, right? So it kind of breaks the ice at the beginning. The other part of it is before you start the meetings, you can always kind of set up ground rules and have your stakeholders provide those ground rules. Ground rules, when I say, is like meeting rules, right? So don't take it like don't throw it at them. Let them provide those rules. Rules could be no multitasking. Rules could be no only one conversation at a time. Now that we're all remote, you could have one rule: raise your hand if you want to contribute. Another one could be turn your video camera on, right? So many times as a BA, you're remote, you can't really see the body language, right? If someone's upset, someone's rolling their eyes. So that could be one rule where they leave the video camera on unless they need to step away. Another one could be breaks, right? So after if it's a full day session, absolutely you want to set up those breaks for them, or have them say, hey, we'll take breaks every 1 hour, So set those ground rules up front for the meeting. And so that'll help you as a facilitator to make sure that you're able to absorb and listen, and pick up on nuances on these conversations. So the other part of it is now you're in your meeting, it's going great. And that being said, you're wrapping up the sessions, right? And even before you're wrapping it up, you as a BA may not be able to multitask, take notes, as well as to listen. So you could assign maybe like a junior BA, or maybe one of the developers to take notes. It's controversial. You don't want to throw things at people, but at the same time, it's really hard to facilitate and to take notes. So at the bottom line is, at the end of the session, make sure that you've documented key decisions, you've documented requirements to the best of your ability, as well as you can summarize action items. There's always going to be action items for stakeholders to find things out and come back to you. So really making sure that you've summarized those action items is critical. And then after that, you would send out a meeting summary of, this was what was discussed. These are the decisions that were made. These are the risks that were identified. And then here are the action items. And these are the action items that need to be done by X, Y, and Z, and get that agreement from the stakeholders to say if that's doable. So those are key things. Before I go here into this video let me go down here. So I went through the 5 key words, right? The what, the when, the why, the how, the where. A couple of examples tied to our case study as well. I can kind of tie that in as well. The what questions to ask is, what goals might you have in mind that this product would help you accomplish, right? Another one could be, what problems do you expect this product to solve for you? And these are very high level. What external events are associated with the product, right? So these could be triggers. What's triggering this online ordering system to get kicked off? In our case, it would be the customer putting in an online order. What words would you use to describe the product, right? What does success look like for this product? What are the sequence of events? What is the start of this product process? What aspects of the current product or business process do you want to transition? So when I say transition here, we keep forgetting, at least I've seen that a lot, where there's transition requirements that need to be gathered. So this kind of captures that as well. Is like, what are the transition requirements? That's kind of what it's trying to get at. The next is a when set of questions, right? When will this product be triggered? When can the product fail? So these are the failure scenarios that you want to capture. You could keep building upon this list here, and you could use that as a canned questionnaire for any sort of effort that you go through. The where questions are, where's the product located? Where will the output be viewable? Where in this process will this product show? So in our case study, we had a report that needed to be generated. So in that case, well, where will the report be viewable, right? So then they have to kind of provide you with those answers. The who questions to ask. Who will use the product? So this goes to the user, right? The user is critical. In the past, it used to be where you're just focused on the product, but given where we are with digital transformation, the who questions become important because that is your customer, and that's basically who's going to use these products, right? Who will use the product? Who will access the backend? Who will view the results? Who will input the data? So that's something to get you guys started with. Now, sometimes you may find that you have to make that determination between open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions. I would highly recommend, before going into a big meeting with big stakeholders involved and you're just gathering and understanding the requirements, use open-ended questions as much as you can, because that will open up a lot of room for them to kind of react, meaning the stakeholders to react. So as an example, well, can you elaborate on XYZ, right? So it's not very confrontational. It's like, well, can you elaborate? It's very it helps them realize that they need to be more specific, right? What is the purpose of doing something, right? Another one is, tell me about this process. Another one you could use is as a BA, you may not be familiar with everything, right? And that's not your job. You're there to do the critical thinking, make sure you gather the requirements. So you can always say, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with XYZ. Can you help me understand, so on and so forth? Or I'm limited in my understanding of this. Can you help me elaborate? So just using the bottom piece of this list here, the open-ended questions, really brings in, helps you as a BA understand things that you don't know, right? And then you can keep going with your questions. So any questions so far? Okay. I've broken this down even further so you guys can go to the website and later on kind of poke through. But it really breaks it down by some more open-ended questions, as well as some targeted questions here. That being said, there's a video here. And if you guys want to kind of role play going into these sessions when you do reach that level, just let me know and I can help you guide through those meetings. Because they can be tough. So this is a video that I found online that can kind of help you. It's not the best of best, but it gives you an understanding of what's involved.
Myself, yes, I'm head of the department, and we are basically like when we already know you have to we have our system automatic subject proposal enrollment system. So this is like our core need of the more clear. That we are required for. But what we do, we have made
Rashmi, video is not very clear at all.
okay, what was also was on the so there was lots of people and
Did I lose you guys? I thought I heard someone.
Yeah, no, I was saying that video is not clear at all. Couldn't really get anything out of it. Just
Okay. Yeah, so Unnati, did you see it all right, or did you not?
No, even I was not able to get anything out of that video.
Okay, so in general, and you can see it on the website later. So in general, I just wanted to show in terms of, okay, so there's this one BA to your left. I don't know if you can see this guy. And then there's the two stakeholders. And so the BA goes in and he's asking the questions. Now, I just wanted, as an example, he's asking the scope level questions in here, really, like what should the system do? You know, typically you would have done the research ahead of time before going into these sessions. That's kind of what I was trying to drive at. But this is on the website, so you guys can go in and look at it later. But I wanted to give you a sense of the role play in terms of the BA interaction with the stakeholders, because you may be familiar with, and I think I'm repeating, you may be familiar with the from a developer standpoint, you know, asking questions, but really from a BA standpoint, your role would be to make sure you understand what is your stakeholder looking for.
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that you gotta do a bit of your own research before you go into these sessions. You don't want to make them feel like, you're coming from no ground at all.
Right. And so Unnati, this may be new to you. So if you need, as I said, once you get to that level of working and going into these sessions, if you need to do role play, just feel free to ping me and more than happy to help out.
Sure.
Yeah. So that being said, those were the items that I wanted to go over with you. In our case study, basically what you would do as a BA, you'd meet with the owner or the finance person, not necessarily the wait staff, right? Maybe you might need someone from the admin that's going to update the menus, maybe all in one room. And you would, going into the session, say, hey, this is the scope, this is what we understand. This is kind of the requirements gathered so far. Do you agree with it? They may tweak things in those sessions, but really use the questionnaire list that we went over to guide your conversations. So that being said, I'm going to pause here. Any questions? Okay, so I will put this recording up on the website as well. You guys can access this, and then we'll go from there. But Amarpreet, how are you feeling? I'm going to stop actually recording as well.